What is hatred? While Thorfinn may give you a different answer, for our Goblin Slayer, hatred is merely a way of life. He exists for the sole purpose of hating goblins and taking them out in the most brutal, inhumane ways possible. He has a homicidal obsession with taking them out. It's like he doesn't care about pain anymore. More important than pain is this hatred that's rising within him. There's a pitch-black flame burning in his soul, and he wants it to burn him. He wants it to engulf every single goblin on the face of the earth. Alright, enough with the berserk narration. Let's see what we got. There's a young and beautiful priestess who decides to join a group of adventurers and accompany them on a raid. They're going to raid a cave that is infested with goblins. It won't be pretty, but then again, it's just goblins, right? They're stupid and small. How could they be a problem? I don't know if you're getting my hints here, but even if they aren't that much of a threat, this group of adventurers is basically just rookies. Everyone has a skill issue. It's not a good idea. Not a good idea at all. Still, the group enters the cave along with the young priestess. So far so good, but then the goblins enter the chat. It's not just one or two either, there's dozens of them, and all of them come at you at once. The guy and the mage lady are captured and violently killed almost right away. There's a girl who's good at hand-to-hand combat, so she tries to fight them off herself, but unfortunately she suffers the worst fate of them all. Once they get a hold of her, they rip apart her clothes and have their way with her before ultimately killing the lady. It's disgusting, and I'm sure some of you may remember all the controversies that arose when this episode first came out in 2018. Now the princess is the only one left. She's going to suffer a horrific fate as well, but fortunately, before the goblins could do anything to her, he appears. We're talking about every goblin's worst enemy, the Goblin Slayer himself. He starts off by slaughtering all the goblins who are trying to jump the priestess. He does it swiftly and ruthlessly, but he doesn't stop after saving the princess. No, he craves to kill more of them. And so the Goblin Slayer continues to walk further into the cave. The priestess follows him because, of course, she does. Since the cave was pretty dark, the priestess lights it up using her magic, which allows Goblin Slayer to easily take out a goblin shaman and a hobgoblin. But here's where it gets worse. The Goblin Slayer then discovers goblin babies. Innocent, defenseless babies. Be that as it may, he doesn't hesitate to mercilessly maul them. Not one bit. He truly is the Goblin Slayer. He won't even let them be able to become threats in the future. Even if it's a goblin infant, a baby, he still slaughters them. The priestess sees all of this, and as you can expect, it's not a very healthy experience overall. She's been traumatized by goblins, but even so, she decides to join the Goblin Slayer. A wise choice, considering how the Goblin Slayer's company might be the safest place in the world if you're scared of goblins. You know, I might be over-exaggerating a little bit. The priestess is actually an incredibly useful lady. Next, we see the Goblin Slayer helping out the cowgirl. She and her have been best friends for a long time, and now he is helping her sell the crops in the city. The two of them also visit the Adventurers Guild, and this is where we see how the community views Goblin Slayer. And it's not that good. It seems not everyone is smart enough to recognize just how much of a favor Goblin Slayer is doing this world. Now they'd rather criticize his cheap armor and how he's a wuss for only ever picking up quests related to goblins, even though there are higher level quests available. But still, the guild girl appreciates him. After all, even though nobody wants to do goblin related quests because of the low reward, the Goblin Slayer is always glad to do them himself. He has no problem doing them all alone. But how come? Why is he so obsessed with killing goblins? What happened? Well, this is where the past is revealed. Back in his early years, the Goblin Slayer was just an ordinary boy from an ordinary village. His father was a priest and his mother was a pharmacist. They were a good family, and the Goblin Slayer was a naive kid who wanted to become an adventurer, just like everyone else. The cowgirl and her parents were also from the same village. Now, one day, the cowgirl went to the city, and he was mad because he also wanted to go to the city himself. Typical toddler behavior. However, that night, the village was attacked. It's attacked not by powerful creatures or an enemy tribe, but by a horde of goblins. They come in swarms and start killing everyone. The girls are captured and toyed with, while men are killed on sight. Both the cowgirl's parents and the Goblin Slayer's parents were killed on that day. He was scared, hiding, and as he was hiding, he saw a true nightmare. The goblins capture, assault, and kill his elder sister right in front of his very eyes, and there's nothing he can do about it. That was the end of his normal life, and the beginning of his hatred. Naturally, since revenge is the only thing he strives for, he's not much of a social fella, which is why the community doesn't have a good opinion about him. The cowgirl's uncle also tells that Goblin Slayer might be too far gone, but as any genuine friend would, she states that she'll continue to support him. She wonders if she had brought him to the city that day, maybe the event wouldn't have been so traumatic for him. Moving on, Goblin Slayer and the priestess are now a team, and they do their first quest together, which is to get rid of the goblins who have taken over a fortress. Well, consider the job done, because when the Goblin Slayer and the priestess arrive on the scene, they burn down the fortress, and the Goblin Slayer makes sure that no goblin escapes. It's brutal, but exactly what it's supposed to be. In the morning, we see a cute high elf, a dwarf, and a lizardman looking for someone. They're looking for an adventurer named Orkbolg. Now, who could that be? They ask the guild girl about the guy, and as it turns out, Orkbolg is just Goblin Slayer, but that's how you say it in the language of the elves. You know something interesting? No one in this anime has an actual name. Everyone is referred to by their title or something similar. Orkbolg is also like another name for Goblin Slayer. Now, the elf, the dwarf, and the lizardman really need a word with our favorite Goblin Slayer. Cool. He humors them. While the priestess gets invited by another rookie party, this one tells her to ditch the Goblin Slayer and join them. They're under the impression that the Goblin Slayer is probably only using her as bait to begin with. The priestess gets a little uncomfortable, but the witch tells the newbies to knock it off. Going back to the conversation between Goblin Slayer and the three characters, High Elf wants him to join them in the fight against the Demon Lord's army. The human kingdoms have already joined forces with other races, but as you can expect, the Goblin Slayer is not interested. He has no interest in any other goal except killing goblins. The High Elf gets angry, and she somehow also gets even cuter when she's angry, so this is where the dwarf and the lizardman continue the conversation. They explain that the ruins in the elven lands have been invaded by goblins. The elves themselves cannot mobilize their army in those ruins because of political and national concerns, and so they'd appreciate the Goblin Slayer's help. That's it. The Goblin Slayer is sold. You had him at Goblin. The priestess is also in. She wants to be a part of it, but she's also a bit annoyed at the Goblin Slayer for not considering her. The group leaves for the elven lands, and on the way they camp, eat good food, and enjoy the company of a drunk, annoyed elven lady. She's mad at the Goblin Slayer for being so rude, but in reality, he's just socially awkward, that's all. The night ends, and then it's the morning. After the elf kills the goblins guarding the entrance using her exceptional archery skills, all of them enter the ruins. It's over for the goblins. Once inside, Goblin Slayer realizes that there are no totems inside, which brings the question, who is leading these goblins? It can't be a goblin shaman, that's not how they operate. They continue to search the inside of the ruins and end up coming across a blonde elven lady tied to a wall. From the looks of it, she's been getting tortured, and she's in a pretty brutal condition. Seeing this makes the high elf seethe with rage. She's going to avenge her fellow elves for whatever the goblins have done to them. The group continues and ends up coming across a hall where all the goblins are taking a break. They decide to not interrupt their rest and just kill them using sleeping spells. It appeared to be working, but maybe it was working too well, because the silence leads to their leader entering the chat. Well, it's not a totem, so who is it? It's an ogre, and this is one of the Demon Lord's generals. You bet he's quite strong. He's large, and his fire-based attacks are exceedingly potent. The elf, the dwarf, the lizardman, and even the priestess are all soon at their limit, but not Goblin Slayer. If there's one thing that would never reach its limit, then it's his hatred for goblins. He brings out a magic teleportation scroll, which was given to him by the witch. With this, he summons strong jets of water from the bottom of the ocean and unleashes them upon the ogre. It's destructive. The ogre definitely didn't expect ocean water to be this strong, though just because the water could do the job doesn't mean that Goblin Slayer lets it. He makes sure that he's the one who lands the final blow on the general. The group then gets out of the ruins, and they're immediately greeted by elven reinforcements. They'll be taking over for them as far as the ruins are concerned. They're on their way back to the city, and on their way, High Elf realizes that maybe she now understands the Goblin Slayer a little bit better. She also thinks that she should take him on a proper adventure sometime. As they say, all that goblin hate makes Jack a socially awkward boy. The Goblin Slayer was severely injured in that battle, so for the time being, he recovers. And when he has recovered, he helps his friend, the cowgirl, with stacking up on supplies. In the city, he comes across our three new friends and tells them that he wouldn't mind exploring some ruins with them. Priestess, on the other hand, tells him that she's gotten a rank promotion as an adventurer. She also expresses how grateful she is to Goblin Slayer for saving her life. Overall, the day's a bit different from usual, in the sense that the Goblin Slayer is not on a quest to kill goblins, a rarity. While walking around, he notices two young adventurers trying to retrieve a sword that fell into the sewers. It's tricky because they'll have to evade disgusting creatures as they try to retrieve the sword, and so the Goblin Slayer tells them to use a big stick and not to go empty-handed. Next, he's at the guild, where the guild girl asks him if he can observe a promotion exam. The examinee turns out to be someone who stole loot, and when they're found out, he tries to attack the wholesome guild girl. Of course, he stops. There wasn't much he could do in front of the overwhelming presence of our Goblin Slayer. The guys from before managed to get the sword out of the sewer, and the laid-back day ends with a special request for the Goblin Slayer. It's from the Sword Maiden, a gold rank adventurer. Now, the Goblin Slayer is not a gold rank adventurer. He's a tier below, a silver ranked adventurer. And for the sake of context, there's only one rank above gold, and that is platinum rank. So getting back to the story, what does the Sword Maiden need our Goblin Slayer for? Obviously, for slaying goblins. There's a pretext. The Sword Maiden belongs to a group of heroes who killed the previous Demon Lord 10 years ago. Right now, there's a new hero, a badass lady who's getting rid of the current Demon Lord, but 10 years ago, it was the Sword Maiden and the group she belonged to. Goblin Slayer, Priestess, High Elf, Dwarf, and the Lizardman all leave for the Water Town. There they meet the Sword Maiden. She's retired from being an adventurer though, and she wants them to solve a number of crazy, violent incidents that have been happening around the town. When the Goblin Slayer realizes that it's the goblins residing in the sewers who are doing all of this, he's ready to spring into action. Again, you had him at Goblin. The Sword Maiden reveals that apparently the army wouldn't mobilize just to fight a few goblins, and the other adventurers who tried to do something about the situation, well, all of them failed, and so she reached out to the Goblin Slayer himself. Indeed, she made the right call. The Goblin Slayer and his party check out the sewer, where they learn exactly how intelligent these little pieces of crap are, because it seems they have learned how to navigate using boats. It greatly disgusts the Goblin Slayer because he had never seen them be this smart before. It's puzzling. They sink a goblin boat and then a massive alligator enters the chat. No problem, they make the best of the situation by tricking the alligator into destroying the goblin fleet. But when they're back on the surface, the Goblin Slayer just can't make any sense of it. If the goblins knew how to navigate using boats, why were they unaware of the alligator? This leads him to a simple conclusion. Someone intelligent enough let the goblins into the sewers. So, who was it? They got some rest and then returned to the sewers to continue the quest. The Goblin Slayer is eager to find the source of it all. He is also rightfully paranoid in the sense that he brings a canary with them, who tell them if there's any poisonous gases in the air. Sure enough, as they continue to move forward, they are trapped and locked in a tomb. If that's not enough, the goblins start pumping in poisonous gases. The canary realizes this, and so they close the vents into the tomb. That way, the gas won't seep through. But the goblins catch on to that, so they attack them all directly. This is where it's revealed that there is indeed someone leading the goblins. It's not an outside party, though. It's a goblin champion. For what it's worth, they are considered to be platinum ranks among goblins. The Goblin Slayer takes him on, but gets brutally and critically wounded. The champion is simply too strong. He catches the priestess while the other goblins jump the high elf, the dwarf, and the lizardman. It's a horrible situation. The priestess screams in pure pain and horror. And this scream is what makes the Goblin Slayer regain his consciousness. He attacks the champion from behind, tears out its right eye, and through his actions he lets the champion know that it wasn't going to go his way. The champion gets scared and runs away with the other goblins. Good. This lets our group have a moment to breathe properly, but the Goblin Slayer's wounds were too much. He collapses. When he wakes up, he's in bed and he's no longer wearing his body armor. The priestess is in the bed too, still asleep though. The Sword Maiden soon enters the room. She's the one who healed him with a resurrection miracle. Now she sits down beside him and talks. The lady reveals what happened to her. She was once captured by the goblins 10 years ago when she was still active. They tortured her and had their way with her body. There are still scars all over her, and she's still partially blind because of what happened. That is what's so dangerous and despicable about the goblins. Even though the Sword Maiden is a gold rank adventurer who helped them defeat the Demon Lord, the goblins still manage to give her some PTSD. They still haunt her dreams. They're the lowest of the low. During the day, elf, dwarf, and lizardmen continue searching the sewers to get more leads on what's going on, and how the goblins are so organized in the sewers, while the Goblin Slayer and the priestess spend the day trying to recover. Goblin Slayer also steps out into town to get his gear repaired. We then see Witch and Spearman, two other silver-ranked adventurers handing over a package to Goblin Slayer. There's also the cowgirl. Since it's been a while since Goblin Slayer left, she's worried, especially because her uncle tells that he may never come back. Anyway, back to killing goblins. Big surprise. The party steps into the sewers again, and we see a giant gate that's being guarded by a demon. The Goblin Slayer brings out the package he received. It contains flour, and he spreads it around the place to create a dust explosion. It happens, and it's potent enough to kill the demon. Once the demon is killed, a mysterious mirror is revealed. This is not just any mirror, it's actually a gate that connects the sewers of Watertown with a place called the Green Moon. So what's the Green Moon? The Goblin Slayer's sister once told him that the goblins come from a place called the Green Moon. There's no vegetation or hydration there. That's why they got jealous and came after humans. Next, they're going to remove the mirror to disconnect the portal, but they're attacked by the goblins who didn't want that. They want the mirror to stay there for 10 years, at least. The lizardman manages to loosen the mirror while the dwarf makes the roof collapse on the goblins. The group survives because they're under the mirror. Now to get rid of the mirror. They encase it in cement and throw it in the river. When the Goblin Slayer reports the success to the Sword Maiden, he also hints that she must have known about the demon and the mirror. Sure enough, she reveals that the mirror was placed by a bunch of cultists, but they're not a problem as the hero has already wiped them out. She also explains that the alligator is actually her familiar, who was tasked to guard the sewers. The reason she didn't just destroy the mirror and the demon after the cultists were out of the picture was because she wanted others to understand how dangerous the goblins are. That's why she let her alligator make sure the situation didn't get worse. It's safe to say that the maiden is quite traumatized, but the Goblin Slayer tells her that if she wants, he will kill the goblins for her, even if it's in her dreams. This eases her mind a little, and from there on out, she stops having those nightmares. Moving on, the hero becomes the 10th ever person throughout history to achieve the Platinum rank. It seems she was successful in taking care of the Demon Lord and his army. The entire kingdom is celebrating. The Demon Lord has been defeated. As for the Goblin Slayer, he helps out the cowgirl with her stuff like usual while his armor gets repaired. In the city, he notices veteran adventurers monitoring the newbies. Next, he comes across the rest of his party, and they all decide to have lunch together. The cowgirl and the guild join in too. Well, they're always welcome. During the lunch, the guild girl explains that the guild has recently started this program where the retired adventurers can train the rookie adventurers. And this works both ways. The retired folk can continue earning a living while the newbies can get rid of their skill issue. All this talk makes the cowgirl wonder if the Goblin Slayer will ever retire as well. As always, she's concerned about him. I guess that makes sense, and I guess that makes sense. The others do see them as husband and wife after all. And as oblivious as the Goblin Slayer may be, she has strong romantic feelings for him. But you know how it is. It's the curse of being a childhood friend. Or maybe that's not relevant here. During the night, she asks him about his future and how he should put more thought into it. And as she's on her bed with just a sheet on her body, she wonders about the future too. Alright, enough with the drama. The following day, the Goblin Slayer finds some goblin footprints while patrolling the farm. His sixth sense tells him about 100 goblins will attack the farm, and they soon do it too. This was serious. He tells the cowgirl that he won't be able to fight that many goblins at once. She should run while she can. But of course, no way is she going to abandon her home again. The Goblin Slayer knows how serious it was, so he goes to ask other adventurers for help, but because there was no reward, no one has any interest in helping him. So whatever. He offers them the stuff he has, his equipment, assets, knowledge, time, whatever. The witch and the spearman realize that this is serious, and they agree to help. Remember the rookies who were looking for the sword they lost and the Goblin Slayer advised them to use a big stick? They agree to help too. Of course, the Goblin Slayer's own party, the priestess, elf, dwarf, and lizardman will be in on the action too, although they would like to share a meal as their reward once it's all over. Things were looking good, and once the guild girl herself announces that every dead goblin can be claimed for a bounty of 1 gold, that's where the rest of the adventurers also decide to join. Though, do you think it's over-preparation considering how it's just 100 or so goblins? Well, no, because the one leading them is a goblin lord. These are above champions, so you can think of them as kings of the goblin race. They're intelligent, and they have done an elective or two in leadership. The attack happens, and thanks to the Goblin Slayer strategy against them, the initial waves of the goblins are slaughtered quite easily. But then the Lord sends in hobgoblins and champions. He sent them to attack the adventurers while he himself was going to leave. But the Goblin Slayer wasn't having that. He confronts the Goblin Lord himself. Alright, the competent adventurers managed to kill all the hobgoblins and the champions, but the Goblin Slayer, who stood up against the Goblin Lord, just couldn't win. In fact, he was on the verge of death. He was going to die. Or that's what the Goblin Lord thought. The priestess casts protection spells and traps the Lord. He literally starts pleading, asking her to let him out. But no, in fact, this was all part of the Goblin Slayer's plan. He distracted the Lord by pretending to lose so that the priestess could cast those spells on the Goblin Lord. Now that the Lord was trapped, the Goblin Slayer, well, slays him. Like always, he slays yet another goblin. Only this time it was a lord. A king. Ultimately, every single goblin is killed, the farm is safe, and it's time to celebrate. Seeing how everything transpired, the cowgirl also wonders if she should become an adventurer. Then there's Priestess. Everyone is in a good mood, so she comes out and says it. She asks the Goblin Slayer to take off his mask and show his face. Sure enough, instead of being a dweeb like Kakashi, he simply takes off his mask. Everyone is surprised to see that the protagonist of the show is actually a handsome young man. They pictured someone that looked much more dangerous and paranoid. And that's about where we end our recap, guys. But keep in mind that as I narrate this and you guys watch this recap, Goblin Slayer is out there fighting goblins, making the world a better place. The second season is out. So if you want me to continue recapping this anime, please preach. And that's the end of the video. As always, if you liked what you saw, subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading a lot of videos just like this, so I'll see you at the next one.